So to get things rolling, we have Councillor VirginiaTachos. She's the Councillor for Horseshoe Bend Ward in Brimbank City Council. She has a proud history of working in the local community and advocacy led by her for council. Her priorities include building strong, sustainable communities, listening to the needs of the community, and supporting harm minimisation through strong advocacy for stricter gambling controls. So please welcome Councillor Tachos.
Thank you, Sally, and thank you, Mayor Giudice. On behalf of Brimbank City Council, I would also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land, the Wurundjeri people, and pay respects to elders past and present. I welcome all my fellow councillors also here today and all distinguished guests. Before I launch into my speech, it's been hard to miss the media the last 24 hours, but Tim Costello, I think, best sums up the enormous power that the gambling corporations wield, and I quote from him: "No jurisdiction anywhere in the world inflicts as much gambling harm and losses on its community as New South Wales, and the Opera House advertising stoush just highlights how the industry uses its power and connections to stand over the government and get what it wants, irrespective of the harm caused," unquote. Interesting food for thought from the Director of the Alliance for Gambling Reform, Tim Costello, who has been advocating for the last 20 odd years. According to the state government gaming data, by the end of today, another 382,000 will be lost on poker machines in Brimbank. In the last financial year, over 139 million was lost on pokies in Brimbank. 139 million lost to 953 machines, the maximum number of pokies that are legally allowable across 15 separate venues. 139 million is a staggering annual loss, an amount this community, particularly as one of Victoria's economically disadvantaged, simply cannot afford to lose. To put this into some sort of scale, Council's entire capital works budget this financial year will be 59 million, an amount we use to build roads, sports grounds, playgrounds, bike paths, upgrade town centres, and much, much more across our entire city. Our community loses more than double this to pokies every single year. But leaving aside the financial and economic impact, consider the human costs behind the statistics, the lives that are disrupted and destroyed by gambling harm. These costs are impossible to quantify, but they are too easily recognised and suffered. The community harm is why we cannot delay this discussion any longer. It is why tonight's forum is so important and why we must continue a whole range of initiatives that will combine over time to create the conditions for success. While Portfolio Councillor for this particular policy area, I do not profess to be an expert in this field, but I am all too aware that the consequences of this issue extend beyond the statistics and immediate economic loss. Community members have relayed to me the severe and lasting outcomes of gambling harm, such as family breakdowns, financial ruin, increased crime, incidents of self-harm, and even in extreme cases, suicide. I have seen and heard the social and psychological damage gambling can cause, which extends to children, elders, families, and entire communities. Some of these stories have literally reduced me to tears. As a councillor, a person with the privilege of office in which we attempt to represent and lead to make the lives of our communities better, I'm personally committed to try and help. But even as someone who is pushing for change as fast as it can possibly be introduced, working within council and across the local government sector, I have been forced to recognise that across the community, extending also to the state governments, that attitudes and concerns towards gambling are not unanimous, that not everyone shares the same view, that solutions to gambling are hard and complex and varied and will need to be fought for and negotiated with multiple stakeholders, some with significant financial and political clout. There are, of course, legitimate questions about how we can best make progress about vested interests and about how big a role or influence council should have or can have in this process when it is the state government that is responsible for regulation of pokies. We will continue to have those questions thrown at us, and we will continue to wrestle with them. In fact, I'm sure we will discuss some of the key issues during the later Q&A session tonight with Sally and the panel members. So while I recognise how challenging minimising gambling harm is and will continue to be, that cannot be a reason for inaction. To merely throw our hands up and say, well, it's all too hard. So I'm pleased to say, as a portfolio councillor, that the council has put its advocacy and support behind a call to action which is supported by 19 other councils across the state, focusing on the restriction of electronic gambling machines, famously described by the Reverend Tim Costello as the crack and cocaine of gambling. In partnership with the Alliance for Gambling Reform, Brimbank Council is running an ambitious evidence-based campaign based on 40 years of research, which tells us that the most effective way to reduce the costs of gambling harm is to create a safer community environment and make gambling machines safer for people to use. Our campaign promotes a comprehensive blueprint for new direction and effort, which calls on the state government and opposition parties to commit to 4 key steps to combat gambling harm. 4 key steps which, if implemented, will help restore hope to individuals and their families. Firstly, we are calling for a sinking cap on poker machines in Brimbank. This would mean that as machines are removed from the venue, they cannot be replaced in another venue. We know that pokies are far and away the biggest cause of gambling harm. Over 75% of Australians experiencing harm from gambling do so because of poker machines. More disturbingly, a body of evidence indicates gambling harm is becoming more concentrated. In neighbourhoods defined by high concentration of poker machines, it is a small group of individuals who use pokies regularly and who sustain the most loss and the most harm. The consequences of this is truly upsetting. Aside from devastating financial implications, a 2016 Victorian study found areas with at least 75 pokies per 10,000 residents were associated with 20% more police-recorded family violence incidents and 30% more family violence assault when compared with postcodes with no machines. Here in Brimbank, the challenge is arguably greater than it is for any other municipality. There are currently 953 poker machines in our community, 204 machines for every 10,000 residents, and we have recorded the highest gambling losses in Victoria for the last 11 years running. Given this, it is imperative that we implement a sinking cap here and now. To complement this step, we are also calling for a reduction in the maximum number of hours gaming venues can operate. In its 2010 report on gambling, the Productivity Commission found that mandatory shutdown periods in Victoria are too short and occur at the wrong times to make them effective as a harm minimisation measure. It also found that moderate risk and problem gamblers are overrepresented among players of gaming machines after midnight, and that commencing mandatory shutdowns earlier and for a longer duration could provide problem gamblers the necessary impetus to discontinue to play. Thirdly, we are calling for $1 maximum bets on all poker machines. At present in Victoria, gamblers can bet up to $5 with every push of a pokies button. With higher intensity of play, individuals are able to bet every 3 seconds. As a result, it is easy for an individual to lose over $1,000 in just 1 hour. This in a community where median incomes are $230 per week below the Victorian average. In comparison, the average loss on a similar machine with a maximum bet of $1 per game is around $120 per hour. This is just common sense. Finally, we as a community need to have knowledge and tools necessary to ask not only how we can do away with this problem, but also how we can collectively address the inequalities and attitudes on which it thrives. We are therefore calling for direct government investment for research into the social, economic, and health dynamics of gambling harm, as well as funding for sport, community infrastructure, and programs to provide alternatives and recreation and other leisure options for our communities. So we know that what we have to do. We know what actions have the best chance of effectively addressing this issue. Whilst this can appear to be an overwhelming challenge, we need to only look at the spirit and dedication of everyone right here to know it can be overcome. So in conclusion, I'm asking for your help. For our campaign to succeed, we need your enthusiasm, we need your energy, and we need your voice and advocacy. Please sign our petition, write to your local Member of Parliament, talk to your friends, talk to your neighbours and colleagues. Talk about why this issue matters. Talk about why our campaign matters here in Brimbank. Across our community, people have eagerly signed up to our campaign. They recognise this is an issue that needs urgent action. Residents like Elise, who works as a financial counsellor in our community and who wrote of regularly seeing the cruel destruction these machines are causing, from broken families to insurmountable debt with emergency relief required for basics such as milk and bread. Residents like Damien, who wrote that he struggled with addiction to pokies and is one of the lucky ones who managed to break free from the group. He's now dedicating his time to help others overcome their addiction because he's tired of seeing his friends and neighbours robbed of their joy and happiness. Let's all be more like Elise and Damien. Let's each do something to help bring about the change we seek. Thank you.